Admiral Ramos sat rigid in his command chair, the weight of the entire human race pressing down on his shoulders. The tactical display before him was a swirling sea of icons and trajectories, each one representing lives, hopes, and the thin line between survival and annihilation. His fingers dug into the armrests, knuckles turning white as his mind raced through the possibilities. Every decision felt like a gamble with the highest stakes, where one misstep could spell the end of Earth and everything he had sworn to protect. His eyes scanned the chaotic dance of ships and weapons, trying to find a pattern, a weakness in the enemy's formation that could be exploited. He knew that the Titan fleet, though incomplete, was humanity's last desperate hope. The Herculean-class battleships were engineering marvels, each bristling with railguns, fusion missiles, and drone bays, but they were untested in battle. Ramos couldn't shake the gnawing fear that he might have ordered them into a fight they weren't ready for. The thought of Earth, his home, the cradle of human civilization, being reduced to a smoldering cinder by the Osan Empire's relentless advance, filled him with a cold dread. He pictured the cities, the people, all the lives that depended on him making the right choice at this critical moment. His breath came in slow, controlled measures, but his heart pounded with the weight of the decision he had made. Was this the end or the beginning of humanity's resurgence? As the first wave of Osan ships broke through the outer defenses, Ramos could see their sleek, predatory shapes slicing through the void, their weapons already charging. The human fleet responded in kind, a volley of railgun fire and missile trails crisscrossing the battlefield in a deadly ballet. Explosions blossomed in the distance, and the tactical display flickered with new data, each flash signaling another ship lost, another life extinguished. All ships, hold the line. Ramos barked into the calm, his voice carrying the authority of a man who knew that retreat was not an option. We will not yield! We will not let these bastards take our home. His words were met with a chorus of affirmations from across the fleet, the resolve of his crews matching his own. But even as the battle raged, doubts gnawed at the edges of his mind. Had he overestimated the strength of the Titan fleet? Had he underestimated the cunning of the Osan commanders? The enemy's tactics were ruthless, their ships moving with precision that suggested they had anticipated every move Ramos had planned. He watched as two of his battleships were caught in a pincer maneuver, their hulls breached by concentrated fire, and felt a pang of guilt for the lives lost under his command. Yet, amid the chaos and destruction, there was a glimmer of hope. The Titan ships, though battered, were holding their own. Their sheer size and firepower were enough to give even the most hardened Osan warrior pause. And as the battle continued, Ramos could see that the enemy's advance was slowing, their initial confidence giving way to hesitation. Perhaps, just perhaps, they hadn't expected this level of resistance. "Admiral, the enemy's flagship is moving to flank us," a voice called out, pulling Ramos from his thoughts. He turned to the display, seeing the telltale signature of the Osan dreadnought, its massive form a stark contrast to the smaller ships around it. This was the moment. If they could cripple the enemy flagship, it might just turn the tide. All batteries, focus fire on the flagship. "I want it reduced to scrap metal," Ramos ordered, the determination in his voice cutting through the tension. As the Titan fleet redirected its firepower, the space around the enemy flagship erupted in a storm of energy. Beams of light and trails of missiles converged on the dreadnought, each impact sending shockwaves through its hull. Ramos watched intently, willing the ship to break apart under the onslaught. But the Osan dreadnought was built for war, its armor absorbing the hits with terrifying resilience. Even as its shields flickered and its hull began to crack, it continued to press forward, its weapons unleashing devastation on the human ships that dared to challenge it. Ramos knew that if the flagship broke through, it could spell disaster for the entire fleet. "Don't let up! Keep firing!" he shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. The display before him was a blur of data and alarms, each new alert signaling another threat, another fire that needed putting out. But Ramos kept his focus on the enemy flagship, knowing that this was the key to victory or defeat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the dreadnought's defenses began to falter. A series of explosions rippled along its length, the result of internal systems failing under the relentless assault. Ramos felt a surge of adrenaline as he saw the ship begin to list, its weapons falling silent as power flickered and died. "It's breaking apart," someone called out, and Ramos allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The enemy flagship, the symbol of Osan power, was disintegrating before his eyes. But the battle was far from over, and Ramos knew that victory here would be only the first step in a much larger war. "All ships, reform the line." "We're not done yet," Ramos ordered, his mind already racing ahead to the next phase of the battle. The Titan fleet had survived its first trial by fire, but the cost had been high, and the enemy was still out there, regrouping for another strike. Ramos took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The fight for Earth was far from over, and he would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The Titan fleet's initial victory was a fleeting moment of relief in the midst of an unrelenting storm. As the shattered remains of the Osan flagship drifted lifelessly through space, the reality of the situation began to settle in. The cost of the battle was etched into the very hulls of the surviving ships, each scar and burn mark a testament to the lives lost and the narrow margin by which they had survived. But Admiral Ramos knew that they had only bought themselves a brief respite. The Osan Empire, vast and vengeful, would not let this defeat go unanswered. Ramos stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the tactical display that flickered before him. The blue icons representing his remaining ships were far fewer than they had been at the start of the battle, and the red markers of the enemy still lingered at the edges of the screen, a constant reminder that the war was far from over. He could almost feel the weight of the losses pressing down on him, the lives that had been sacrificed under his command. But there was no time for mourning, no time to dwell on what had been lost. The fight was still ongoing, and Earth was still under threat. "Status report," Ramos barked, his voice cutting through the tense silence that had settled over the bridge. The crew, exhausted but determined, moved with practiced efficiency, their fingers flying over consoles as they relayed the latest updates. "Admiral, the remaining Osan forces are regrouping at the edge of the system," one of the tactical officers reported, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "We're picking up signs of additional reinforcements arriving from the Osan core worlds. They're not done with us yet." Ramos nodded grimly, his suspicions confirmed. The Osan Empire was a beast that would not be easily subdued, and it was already licking its wounds, preparing for the next strike. "What about our forces?" he asked, his tone heavy with the weight of command. "We've taken heavy losses, sir," the officer replied, her eyes flicking across the readouts on her screen. "Over half of the Titan fleet has been destroyed or critically damaged. The ships that remain are operational, but they're not at full strength. We're also running low on munitions and fuel reserves." Ramos clenched his jaw, the grim reality of their situation sinking in. They were battered, bruised, and running on fumes, but they still had a chance. They still had the will to fight. "Prepare all remaining ships for immediate repairs," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "We need to be ready for whatever comes next. We don't have the luxury of time, so make every second count." As the bridge crew sprang into action, Ramos turned his attention to the larger strategic picture. The battle over Saturn had been a costly victory, but it had also given them a crucial opportunity. The Osan forces were reeling, their morale shaken by the unexpected ferocity of the human resistance. If they could capitalize on that momentum, they might be able to push the Osans back, buy themselves enough time to regroup and prepare for the next phase of the war. But to do that, they needed more than just firepower. They needed allies, resources, and a strategy that would outmaneuver an enemy that was larger, stronger, and more technologically advanced. Ramos knew that Earth couldn't fight this war alone. They needed to forge alliances, rally other civilizations to their cause, and find a way to turn the tide of the conflict before the Osan. Ramos straightened, bracing himself for whatever news was about to come through. "Put it through," he commanded, turning to face the main view screen as it flickered to life. The stern face of Director Chen appeared on the screen, the lines of worry and exhaustion etched deeply into his features. Ramos had known Chen for years, had served under him in countless campaigns, but he had never seen the man look so grave. "Admiral Ramos," Chen began, his voice low and measured, "we have a situation. Our intelligence has confirmed that the Osans are not only regrouping, they're mobilizing their core fleets for a full-scale invasion of Earth." Ramos felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. A full-scale invasion. If the Osan core fleets were unleashed, Earth would face an onslaught unlike anything they had encountered before. Even with the Titan fleet at full strength, they would be hard-pressed to repel such an attack. And in their current state, with ships damaged and resources dwindling, "How much time do we have?" Ramos asked, his voice calm despite the turmoil churning inside him. Chen hesitated, his eyes betraying the gravity of the situation. "Not long," he admitted. "Our estimates give us a matter of days, maybe a week at most, before they're within striking distance. We need to prepare for the worst, Admiral. We need to consider the possibility that Earth might not survive this." The words hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder of the stakes they were facing. Ramos knew what Chen was implying, that they needed to start considering evacuation plans, contingency measures to ensure the survival of the human race, even if it meant abandoning their home. But the thought of leaving Earth to the mercy of the Osans, of giving up the fight without exhausting every last option, was one that Ramos would not accept. "No," Ramos said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of his resolve. "We're not done yet. We still have time, and we still have options. The Osans might think they have us cornered, but we're going to show them what it means to fight for our survival. We're going to make them regret ever thinking they could take Earth." Chen's expression softened, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. "What do you propose, Admiral?" he asked, his tone tinged with cautious optimism. Ramos took a deep breath, the gears of strategy turning in his mind. "We're going to launch a counteroffensive," he declared. "We'll take the fight to them, hit them where they least expect it. But first, we need to gather our allies. The Osans might have numbers on their side, but we have something they don't, a cause worth fighting for. If we can rally other species to our side, we can create a coalition strong enough to push them back. We've held our own so far. Now it's time to turn the tide." Chen nodded slowly, the spark of determination returning to his gaze. "I'll do everything in my power to make that happen, Admiral. But we need to act fast. The clock is ticking." "I know," Ramos replied, his voice steely. "And we're not going to waste a single second. Prepare to transmit a message to all known allies and neutral parties. It's time to bring the galaxy together against a common enemy. Earth will not fall on my watch." As the screen went dark and the connection was severed, Ramos felt a renewed sense of purpose surging through him. The battle over Saturn had been a victory, but it was only the beginning. The true test was yet to come, and the fate of Earth, of humanity, rested on the decisions he would make in the days to come. He turned back to the tactical display, his mind already racing through the possibilities. The Osans were strong, but they were not invincible. If they could outthink them, outmaneuver them, they could win this war. But it would take everything they had: courage, sacrifice, and an unbreakable will to survive. "All hands," Ramos called out, his voice echoing across the bridge. "Prepare for battle. We're going to show the Osans that humanity is not so easily defeated. This is our home, and we're going to fight for it with everything we've got." The crew responded with a chorus of affirmations, their spirits lifted by Ramos's unwavering resolve. They were battered, they were outnumbered, but they were not broken. And as long as they had breath in their bodies, they would fight to defend their world. The war was far from over, but Ramos knew one thing for certain: humanity would not go down without a fight. As the Titan fleet moved into position, the weight of the task ahead loomed over every crew member. The battle over Saturn had given them a temporary reprieve, but the looming threat of a full-scale invasion from the Osan core fleets left no room for complacency. Repairs were underway across the fleet, with engineers and technicians working around the clock to bring the damaged ships back to operational status. The air was thick with the smell of scorched metal and the sounds of welding torches, a stark reminder of the cost of their recent victory. Admiral Ramos, ever the stalwart leader, walked through the bustling corridors of his flagship, the Dauntless. His presence was a steadying force for the crew, a symbol of unwavering determination. He knew that morale was just as crucial as firepower in this fight. If they were to survive the coming storm, every member of the Titan fleet needed to believe in their cause, to know that they were fighting for more than just survival. They were fighting for the future of humanity. Ramos entered the war room, where his senior officers were already gathered around the central holo table, their faces lit by the flickering blue light of the tactical display. The atmosphere was tense but focused. They had been through hell together, and they were prepared to go through it again. Admiral, Commander Akachi greeted him with a nod, his Spartan armor still bearing the marks of battle. The man was a living embodiment of the phrase battle hardened, his eyes sharp with the readiness of a seasoned warrior. Our scouts report that the Osan forces are regrouping at the outer edge of the system. They're massing for another push, likely targeting Earth directly this time. Ramos nodded, his expression grim. We expected as much. They know we're vulnerable after Saturn, and they're not going to give us time to recover. What's our status on repairs and rearmament? Captain Keller, who had led the strike on the Osan supply lines, stepped forward. We've managed to get most of the critical systems back online, but our ammunition reserves are running low. The engineers are working miracles, but we need more time to fully rearm and refuel the fleet. We're not at full strength, but we're not out of the fight yet. Ramos's mind raced as he absorbed the information. They were pressed for time, and every second counted. We need to stretch our resources as far as they'll go, he said, his voice calm but authoritative. Prioritize repairs on the ships that are closest to operational status. We need every gun we can bring to bear on the Osans, and make sure the supply lines are secure. If the Osans disrupt our logistics, we're finished before the battle even begins. The officers nodded in agreement, their faces set in determined lines. They knew the stakes, and they were ready to do whatever it took to defend their home. Ramos could see the resolve in their eyes, and it filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. They were tired, they were battered, but they were still standing. And as long as they stood, so too would Earth. What about the coalition? Ramos asked, turning to Director Chen, who had joined the meeting via HoloLink. Have we made any progress in rallying other species to our cause? Chen's face appeared on one of the smaller screens, his expression a mix of hope and concern. We've sent out messages to every known neutral party and ally in the galaxy, emphasizing the threat the Osan Empire poses not just to Earth, but to the stability of the entire region. We've had some positive responses, but it's going to take time for any potential allies to mobilize and reach us. Unfortunately, time is something we don't have in abundance. Ramos exhaled slowly, weighing their options. They were fighting against the clock, and every decision could mean the difference between victory and annihilation. We need to buy ourselves as much time as possible, he said after a moment. If we can't hold them off with brute force, we'll have to outthink them. Set traps, use the environment to our advantage, and make them pay for every inch of space they try to take from us. Commander Akachi nodded, his mind already working through the tactical possibilities. We can deploy mines in the asteroid belt and use the gravity wells of the larger planets to create kill zones. The Osans are powerful, but they're not invincible. If we hit them where they're vulnerable, we can slow their advance and force them to rethink their strategy. Captain Keller added, we can also use hit-and-run tactics to harass their supply lines. It worked before, and it can work again. The more we can disrupt their logistics, the less effective their frontline forces will be. Ramos agreed with both assessments. Do it, and get our stealth ships ready for a recon mission. I want to know exactly what we're up against before they get too close. We can't afford any surprises. As the officers moved to carry out their orders, Ramos turned his attention back to the larger strategic picture. The Osans were relentless, but they had underestimated humanity before, and they could do so again. Earth's greatest strength had always been its ability to adapt, to find a way to survive against all odds. That was the key to their survival now, adaptation and resilience. Ramos's thoughts were interrupted by an incoming transmission. The communications officer's voice crackled over the intercom. Admiral, we're receiving a priority message from the Jovian Confederation. They've agreed to send a fleet to assist us, but they're requesting immediate support to repel an Osan attack on one of their border worlds. Ramos's heart lifted slightly at the news. The Jovian Confederation was a powerful ally, and their support could be the turning point in the war. But the Osans were already moving to isolate and conquer them. If they didn't act fast, they could lose a crucial partner in the fight. "Set a course for the Jovian border," Ramos ordered without hesitation. "We're going to help them hold the line. We need every ally we can get in this war, and we're not going to let the Osans take them out without a fight." The Titan fleet moved as one, engines flaring to life as they adjusted course. The ships were battered, their crews exhausted, but they were far from beaten. As they accelerated towards the Jovian system, Ramos knew that the coming battle would be critical. If they could save the Jovians and secure their support, they might just have a chance to turn the tide. But if they failed, the thought lingered in the back of Ramos's mind, a dark shadow over the light of hope. Failure was not an option. Not when the survival of humanity was at stake. As the fleet made the jump to faster-than-light travel, the stars around them blurred into streaks of light. Ramos stood at the helm of his flagship, his mind focused on the challenges ahead. The war was entering a new phase, and he was determined to lead his people through it, no matter the cost. They were not just fighting for Earth. They were fighting for the future, for the right to exist in a galaxy that had shown them no mercy. And as long as there was breath in his body, Admiral Ramos would fight with everything he had to ensure that humanity would not only survive, but emerge victorious. The Titan fleet surged through space, the stars blurring into streaks of light as they raced toward the Jovian border. Admiral Ramos stood on the bridge of the Dauntless, his gaze fixed on the tactical display before him. The situation was dire, but there was no room for doubt. The Jovian Confederation was one of the last remaining bastions of resistance against the Osan Empire, and their support could be the key to turning the tide in humanity's favor. Ramos knew that if they didn't arrive in time, the Jovians would be overrun, leaving Earth even more vulnerable. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity as the fleet hurtled through space. The tension on the bridge was palpable, the crew working in near silence as they prepared for the battle ahead. Every crew member understood the stakes. They were fighting not just for their own survival, but for the survival of an entire species. Finally, the FTL drives powered down, and the Titan fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The view screen flickered as it adjusted to real space, revealing the chaotic battle unfolding around the Jovian border world. Osan warships, sleek and deadly, swarmed the planet's orbital defenses, their weapons blazing as they pounded the Jovian ships and installations. Explosions lit up the dark expanse of space, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. "All ships, prepare for combat," Ramos ordered, his voice steady and commanding. "Focus fire on the Osan battlecruisers. We need to break their formation and give the Jovians some breathing room." The Titan fleet responded with precision and discipline, their weapons charging as they moved into position. The first salvo of railgun fire erupted from the Dauntless, the kinetic rounds streaking across space to slam into the nearest Osan cruiser. The impact was devastating, punching through the enemy ship's shields and tearing a hole through its hull. The Osan ship reeled from the hit, its weapons momentarily silenced as it struggled to recover. Around the Dauntless, the other Titan ships opened fire, their combined might hammering the Osan fleet. Energy beams lanced out from Jovian defense platforms, adding to the onslaught as the defenders rallied under the cover provided by the Titan fleet. The Osans, caught off guard by the sudden reinforcement, scrambled to regroup, their previously coordinated attack falling into disarray. "Captain Keller, take your strike group and hit their flanks," Ramos ordered, his eyes narrowing as he studied the tactical display. "We need to push them back and create an opening for the Jovian forces to counterattack." Keller's strike group, consisting of the fastest and most agile ships in the fleet, broke formation and accelerated toward the Osan's vulnerable flank. The ships weaved through the battlefield, dodging enemy fire as they closed the distance. As they neared the Osan line, Keller gave the order to fire, and a barrage of antimatter missiles streaked toward the enemy ships. The missiles detonated on impact, their explosive force amplified by the proximity to the Osan ships. Several enemy vessels were obliterated in the blink of an eye, their wreckage spiraling out into space. With their flank in disarray, the Osan forces began to falter. Jovian ships, emboldened by the sudden shift in momentum, surged forward to join the counterattack. The battle, which had seemed all but lost just moments before, now hung in the balance. But Ramos knew that they couldn't afford to let up. Not yet. "Commander Akachi, deploy your Spartans to the surface," Ramos commanded. "The Osans have likely landed ground troops to secure the planet. We need to eliminate that threat before they can establish a foothold." Akachi, ever the stoic warrior, nodded and relayed the orders to his troops. Moments later, drop pods streaked from the underbelly of the Titan ships, blazing through the atmosphere toward the planet's surface. The Spartans, clad in their formidable power armor, were humanity's best, and Ramos had no doubt they would get the job done. As the drop pods descended, Akachi's mind was focused on the mission ahead. He had led his Spartans through countless battles, but each one was a test of their skills and resolve. The Osans were formidable opponents, but the Spartans had faced worse. The drop pods impacted the ground with a resounding thud, their doors blowing open to reveal the armored warriors within. Without hesitation, the Spartans fanned out, their weapons at the ready. The landscape was bleak, a barren wasteland scarred by craters and debris from the ongoing battle. Osan troops, their sleek armor glinting in the dim light, were already fortifying positions near key installations. They hadn't anticipated such a rapid response from the Titan forces, and that was the Spartans' advantage. Moving with practiced efficiency, Akachi led his team through the hostile terrain, their armor rendering them nearly invisible to the enemy sensors. They closed the distance to the Osan fortifications with deadly precision. "On my mark," Akachi whispered into his comm. His Spartans took up positions around the enemy encampment, their weapons trained on the unsuspecting Osans. 3, 2, 1. Mark! The Spartans erupted from cover, their weapons unleashing a storm of fire upon the Osan troops. The enemy was caught off guard, their ranks decimated in the first few seconds of the assault. Akachi's Spartans moved like phantoms, striking with lethal accuracy before disappearing back into the shadows. The Osans, disoriented and outgunned, struggled to mount an effective defense. Akachi's team pressed the advantage, clearing out the fortifications and securing the area with ruthless efficiency. Back in orbit, the space battle was reaching its climax. The Titan fleet, now fully engaged with the Osan forces, was pushing the enemy back, but the cost was high. Several of the Titan ships had taken critical damage, their hulls breached and systems failing. Ramos watched as one of the Jovian cruisers took a direct hit from an Osan plasma cannon, the ship breaking apart in a spectacular explosion. "We need to take out that command ship," Ramos said, his voice laced with urgency. "If we can decapitate their leadership, the rest of the fleet will fall apart." The Dauntless pivoted, its weapon systems locking onto the Osan command ship. The enemy vessel was massive, bristling with weapons and heavily armored. It was the nerve center of the Osan fleet, coordinating their movements and relaying orders. Taking it out would be a major blow to the enemy's ability to fight.